Good morning. Welcome back to Miss Chea's 10th grade English class. I want to start off today by summarizing and jogging your memory about our last class and what we covered. Then, I want to give you an overview of what we are covering today. During our last class meeting, we began by introducing the novel by Sherman Alexie, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, to you. First, we began by going over the historical context and background that the class needed in order to be fully immersed in the reading. Throughout our classroom discussion, we came to the conclusion that throughout Native American history, they have been constantly mistreated by white settlers. We came to this conclusion through our first discussion about Columbus's invasion in 1493. This caused the spread of sicknesses and diseases to the Native Americans in the Americas. We then also discussed the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which was signed by President Andrew Jackson, which authorized the president to negotiate with Southern Native American tribes for their forceful removal to the federal territories west of the Mississippi River in exchange for white settlement of their ancestral lands. This then led to one of many tragic forceful removals of Native Americans from their land. Does anyone in the class remember which event we talked about during our last class?
Yes, I remember. The Trail of Tears in 1838.
Yes, very good. And as you may remember, this tragic event involved approximately 60,000 Native Americans. That's a lot of people. And the worst of it is that during their grueling 5,043-mile trek, about 16,000 people died due to diseases, exhaustion, and starvation. We then briefly went over and discussed the key themes that you will see throughout the novel. These consist of separation and isolation, which you will be able to see in the protagonist Arnold's spirit, external and institutional racism, which Arnold faces at his old school and throughout his life on the reservation. These themes also can be seen especially later on in the book when he attends the predominantly white school, Reardon. And lastly, poverty, which the author Alexie throughout the novel insinuates and criticizes about the unjust Native American reservation life. Now that we have finished briefing you on what we have covered during our last class, we will now talk about what we are going to do today. It's going to be a very fun and exciting class because today we will be discussing and focusing on the theme of institutional racism by examining and analyzing the relationship between Arnold and his geometry teacher, Mr. P. Now, unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, our class has tearfully been forced to go online. However, we are going to make this work with the power of technology. Luckily for us, we can have our discussion with our students via Zoom. So you will be able to hear our student but not be able to see them. So let's begin. We'll start by having the class spend the first 5 minutes writing, drawing, or both about the prompt. How has your day at school been so far? How have the teachers been? While our students are working on the answering the prompt, I would like to take the opportunity to show you my example of the prompt. So, based off of when I last was at school with the rest of you, I remember I had gotten out of the car and I had stepped in a pile of poop. And I was so embarrassed, so I quickly wiped it off of my shoe and I headed into school. But unfortunately, I didn't catch it all and I was leaving a trail, and Mr. Ed aka the janitor as most of you know him as, saw the smears that were on the ground and he got really upset and I was really embarrassed, but the rest of the day went well, so that's pretty good. So now, do any of our students have their answer to the prompt done?
Yes, I do, Miss Chia.
Okay, great. Thank you, Eric. I will share your example with the rest of the class then. Eric was kind enough to allow us to view his example. So, based off of the picture that Eric has for me, it seems like in Mr. Jackson's class there was a substitute, and it seems like he's not doing anything, but over here it seems like the kids are just talking. And Eric, I really enjoyed your answer to the prompt. And I think that your answer relates a lot to what we are covering today. Would it be okay if we talk a bit more about your answer?
Yeah, sure.
Great. Based on what I was able to interpret from your drawing, it seems like the students in your class were being loud and rowdy. Is that correct?
Yeah, we were just talking a bit, but that's because we didn't really have anything to do.
Oh, so the substitute didn't assign any work or tell you guys anything?
Nope, we just focused on the computer.
That's not good. But that's actually very interesting because I think that substitute reminds me of someone. Do they remind you of any characters in the book?
I guess a little like Mr. P, but Mr. P was way lazier.
Oh, that's very interesting. Why? What makes you say that?
Because sometimes he would just not show up to class at all. Or if he did, he'd just be in his pajamas and look like he had just gotten up.
Very interesting. And from your assigned reading on pages 1 through 53, what was the reaction that you got from Arnold from this behavior?
Well, at first, it seemed like Arnold really liked Mr. P, but then he got really upset at him and threw a book at him because it was so old.
Oh, how old was it?
It was old enough to have his mom's name written in it.
Wow, that is pretty old. How do you think this relates to the theme of institutional racism?
Well, based on the definition that you gave us during the previous class, which was the discrimination and imbalances of resources, power, and opportunity to colored people, I think that the outdated textbooks that the reservation have are probably not the same as the ones that Reardon have.
And what makes you say that?
Well, mainly because the school is full of rich white kids, so they're able to get better equipment, unlike what the kids at the reservation are able to get.
That's good. And tying it back to institutional racism, why can't the school on the reservation get the same resources as Reardon?
Well, honestly, I'm not too sure, but I think it's because it seems like they're not as important. Like we had talked about yesterday and throughout history, Native Americans have been mistreated, and it seems that even though it's different now, they're still not being treated as good.
That's very true. Do you think that there's a way for the school on the reservation to gain the same resources as Reardon?
Well, I think there is a way, but it's going to be very difficult. I think it has to begin by the way that the school treats the children. So maybe it can even start with the teachers like Mr. P being more serious about teaching. Maybe if he were to show more enthusiasm and not always look sleepy, then he could actually inspire the students to want to learn.
Well, I think you make a very excellent point, Eric. Do you think that maybe Mr. P is trying to make a change now by the way he talks to Arnold?
Yeah, I think so. Because like I had said before, Arnold seems to like Mr. P, but he's just really lazy. But he was also the one who talked to him about transferring to Reardon.
Oh, so having said that, do you think that Mr. P is actually a good teacher?
Well, that's definitely a hard one. But I think based on what I've read so far, No. But who knows, maybe as I continue to read, I'll find out that Mr. P has changed.
So, what do you predict Arnold's feelings will be about Reardon in comparison to life on the reservation?
Well, he definitely feels like it's going to be difficult for him because moving to a new school and not knowing anyone is always hard. Especially if they're a lot different from you. It's definitely going to be very hard to fit in.
Yes, you might be right, but I won't spoil anything for you. So, just to put it out there so you can't say I didn't assign you homework, for tonight you will have to read the next 5 chapters, and hopefully then you will find out whether or not your prediction is true. I think that the discussion that we had was very interesting, and I think that because of Mr. P's actions, that, like Eric had said, he provided Arnold with the opportunity that he was unable to access at the school on the reservation. Thank you very much, Eric. I really appreciate you answering my questions, and I think that you provided a lot of feedback that was really important to what we were talking about today. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Ms. Chea.
So before moving on to the next activity, I'd like to end this segment with a quote that I feel was very inspiring from Mr. P, who on the outside seems like a lazy, uninspired teacher, but it seems that based on our discussion, he might not be that way. So here's the quote. "You've been fighting since you were born," he said. "You fought off the brain surgery, you fought off those seizures, you fought off all the drunks and drug addicts. You kept your hope, and now you have to take your hope and go somewhere other people have hope." I think that this is a very important quote that helps to tie together everything that we have talked about during today's discussion, because even though Arnold and everyone on the reservation struggles with institutional racism, it seems that even with all the odds against Arnold, that by believing in himself and having people like Mr. P to support him is what will hopefully make him successful at Reardon. And I think that this quote can be related to all of us, because as long as you continue to believe in yourself and surround yourself with positive influences, that you'll be able to achieve whatever goals you hope to accomplish. Because even with all these obstacles trying to tear you down, as long as you keep your hope, you can reach the stars. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next segment.